And I think you all have to say yes to this. So you all have your handouts, correct?
Yes.
Super. Okay. Okay. Welcome. I'm so glad to have you all. This is a fun class and lots and lots of information. And as a master's class, I am going to give you a lot more detailed information than what we would have done in another class. And so this one you'll find just has, I hope in some ways I overload you with information, because that means then I've given you a lot of stuff to think about. And the good thing is you have the recordings from all 4 classes when we're finished. And so if you ever need to go back and review anything, then you can. So let's go ahead and begin. So let's start with sunrise and sunset. So to get sunrise and sunset photos, it's a really, really simple thing. And both of you all are using mirrorless. So this is fairly easy to do. But and Stephanie, come back on the line and remind me what camera Tina has.
Tina has the Canon 5D Mark IV.
Okay.
But she's toying with getting a mirrorless.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I can periodically address her camera since she's not here. Okay, so sunrise and sunset. So what we're going to do is, you see this glorious sunrise or sunset, you point your camera at the scene, and then you underexpose by 1 stop. So if you're in aperture priority mode, then you underexpose by 1 stop using your back dial. It's nice, everybody's Canon, so I can talk about Canon cameras here. If you are in shutter priority, then you would do exactly the same thing, underexpose by 1 stop using your back dial. And what you do when you underexpose by 1 stop is that this gives you much more saturated colors, and it also gives you that beautiful black of the silhouette. So that's what we're looking for. And in the mirrorless through the viewfinder, you can see this right when it happens when you underexpose. And you also want your mirrorless to be set for view simulation, I think is the title for it. So you want your screen to darken and lighten when you overexpose and underexpose. That's one of the strong advantages of having the mirrorless cameras. And you also want to make sure that maybe the 1 stop doesn't work, but maybe you need 2 stops. So you look on the back of the camera after you've taken the picture at 1 stop underexposed. And if the area around the sun is blinking, then you want to go 2 stops underexposed. So in this shot that's showing on the screen, it might be a 2 stop underexposure. The area where the sun is will always blink at you on the back of the camera when you look at the picture on the back. So don't worry about that. We just don't want the area around the sun to be blinking, because that means that that has been overexposed. So a shot like this, we might be 2 stops underexposed. And then also make sure that your silhouettes are nice and clear and precise. So we don't want things to be overlapping with each other, the stork overlapping with the tree. We don't want things to be overlapping with each other. We don't want a stick sticking up into the horizon that's not supposed to be there. So we want our silhouettes to be as clean as we possibly can so that people understand what we're trying to photograph. If you use a long lens, so this is done with a 500 millimeter lens, then the sun is going to be very big in the frame. And if that's what you're looking for, that big, huge, glorious sun going down or coming up, then we would do that with a 500 millimeter lens or a 400 millimeter lens or one of your longer lenses. So the longer your lens is on the camera, then the bigger your sun is going to be. Same thing will hold true when we get to moons. It'll be the same way. So once again, you want to keep your silhouettes clean. If you've got a sun like this in the photograph, then chances are it's going to be a 2 stops underexposed, so that we can make sure that that sun or that sky around the sun is not overexposed. And then if we do want to include the foreground in a sunset shot, then if we have that sky and we also have that foreground that we want to try to show in a sunset spot, then this is where we can take the picture, make sure on the back of the camera that the area up where the sun is not too overexposed, and then don't worry about the foreground. It will be dark on the back of the camera, but don't worry about that, because the shadow slider in your Lightroom or in your Adobe Camera Raw is going to be used to bring out the foreground. So you look at the picture originally on the back of the camera, sky looks good. We don't have too much blinking, only blinking around where the sun is. And then that foreground's going to be dark. Don't worry about that, because we've got a half and half photo now of the sun plus, or the sky plus the foreground. That foreground area is going to be able to be pulled out with your shadow slider later on. And so that's how we can get this foreground and sky as well. This picture also has been post-processed after I've moved it through either Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw. I've then moved it into Nik, and Nik is an alternate, an add-on software, and I'm using the detail extractor in Nik Color Efex 2 to pull out those crepuscular rays. So those crepuscular rays in the sky, you and I see them very well with our eyes, but they don't come out as strong as we want them to be on the photograph. So if we have something with those crepuscular rays, just understand that we're going to be able to enhance them with the Nik software, Color Efex, Detail Extractor. And that's how we're going to be able to get those really pronounced rays coming out from the sun. So we get these crepuscular rays when there's a break in the cloud, the sun's coming through the break in the cloud, and then there's also moisture or dust in the sky. So that's how we get these crepuscular rays. But once again, making sure that your silhouettes are nice and separated, that your birds in this situation have turned their heads in the right direction so that we're not just getting a blob, that we don't have any sticks or twigs that are interfering with them. And then in this situation too, we can pull out that foreground detail just a little bit by using the shadow slider. So looking on the back of the camera, when you first get the picture on the back of the camera, your foreground's going to look dark and your crepuscular rays are not going to look as pronounced. There's nothing we do about that in the field. It's done later on in your processing when we use the shadow slider to bring out the details in the foreground. And then we use the Nik Color Efex 2 Detail Extractor to pull out those crepuscular rays.
You're using evaluative metering.
Exactly.
And the only thing that should really be blinking is the sun.
Exactly. You got it. You got it. So in your sunset or your sunrise, the only thing that's blinking at you is the sun. Yes. Okay. Yes. And just don't worry about that. So your Nik Color Efex Detail Extractor is what's going to bring out those crepuscular rays. Some people call these God rays, but they're called crepuscular rays. And that's that Nik Color Efex Detail Extractor that pulls those out. And then Carol, you're absolutely right. The only thing that should be blinking on the back of the camera is right where the sun is. So that, you know, the good thing, you underexpose 1, you underexpose 2, whatever it might be. But then later on, we can pull out shadows and we can pull out the rays with the detail extractor. You got where you were going. Yeah, good. And then if we want to add something, and that would be the starburst. So the starburst comes from, and mute yourself. There you go. You got it. Okay. So the starburst on the sun comes from your lens. And this is the function of the lens that you are using. So if you stop your lens down to 22, which if you think about it, we don't need in a sunset. We can shoot a sunset at 4.5 or 5.6. We don't need 22 unless we've actually trying to show the entire foreground. But most of the time we don't need that with sunsets or sunrises. But if we do want the sun to be a starburst, in our sunset or sunrise. Then we use F22. We've already underexposed by 1 or underexposed by 2. And if the sun is partially blocked by something, in this case, the cloud, then we're going to be able to get that starburst off of the sun. So we're doing your silhouette, but yet we're also adding that starburst to it, or excuse me, you're doing your sunset or your sunrise.
Mhm.
Now this is taken with the R 15 to 35 millimeter lens. You would do the exact same thing with this one as if you had the 16 to 35 on your digital SLR camera. And this starburst comes from using the F22. So 22 or 32, whatever we have, it's because the aperture is very closed down and the light is bending around the edges of the aperture blades. So that's what ends up giving us the starburst. In this case, I do want my depth of field. So I'm using my F22, if F32, if you have it, I would shoot this exactly like I would do a traditional landscape photograph. I would put my focus point a third of the way into the frame. So right about where my cursor is, not on the horizon, because then I'm wasting my foreground depth of field. Depth of field is 1/3 forwards and 2/3 backwards. And so that focus point would be about a third of the way into the frame. And then with my F22 or my F32, then I'm able to get that starburst on the sun. This on the back of the camera shows me that the foreground field of wildflowers is dark, but then I'm going to pull that out with my shadow slider later on. And that's going to work, just fine. Now, the beautiful thing too about your R5 and your R6 and even the 5D Mark IV is that the quality of the sensor is so good that in low light, we can pull out the shadow detail with the shadow slider and not corrupt the image. So this was shot at probably an ISO 100 or 200, F22, focus point third of the way in. And then when I go to process it, I can simply pull out that foreground and now I can get the foreground of the wildflowers. That starburst on the sun can happen during the middle of the day as well. And once again, if something is partially blocking the sun, then we get that burst of light that comes. How many rays are on your starburst on the sun depends on what kind of lens you are using. The better quality lens you are using, the more rays in your sun. The less quality lens you are using, the less rays in your sun. So this shows you an example of a lesser quality lens. You see how the sun forms a starburst, but it's a kind of a mushy starburst. And that's because the lens I'm using is not as high quality. So the better quality lens you're using with the better construction to it, the more starburst you're going to have. Once the sun goes below the horizon, no starburst. And then once again, lesser quality lens, lesser starburst. Yeah, Stephanie.
Okay, so you're saying lesser quality. Does that mean like an f4 as opposed to an f2.5 or an actual Tamron versus a Canon lens?
A cheap Canon lens versus an expensive Canon lens. So the cheap Canon lens that came with your camera, the 18 to 55 or something like that, compared to one of the L series lenses or one of the R series lenses. So the better quality lens you use, the better your starburst is going to be. Okay, so this, for instance, is the Canon 16 to 35 millimeter lens. If for Tina on her 5D Mark IV, or if you're still using this lens on your R camera, then it would do the same thing. So the 16 to 35 gives us one of the best starbursts on our wide angle lenses in the Canon line. And then using that and knowing that when the sun just barely peaks over the side of that church, I'm going to get a starburst that comes off of it. So you're designing your photo with that starburst in mind, as well as your sunrise and your sunset in mind. And then if the guy in the little boat comes by to add you something from the photography gods, then that's just added lanyard
that's
to your
nice.
photographs. Yeah. Yeah. It was really good. It was really neat that they came by at the right time. Yeah. So where your sun is in the frame, what the quality of your starburst is, and then getting those complete black silhouettes that we're looking for in certain situations. That's what we're going through with our sunrise or our sunsets. Now, there are some people that are going to tell you that for these sunrises and sunsets, you might want to use a graduated neutral density filter. And a graduated neutral density filter in the old days, and old days, I'm talking about 10 years ago, was a necessity because we didn't have the post-processing software to be able to process out our photographs later on. So what we did with a graduated neutral density filter, and this is what it looks like right here, is a graduated neutral density filter. It's dark on the top and it's clear on the bottom, very dark on the top, clear on the bottom, or sort of dark on the top and clear on the bottom. Now, what we had to do in the old days to get this photograph is we had to slide that neutral density filter, graduated neutral density filter in its holder. We had to slide it down to where the dark edge hit the horizon or the dark edge hit about the middle of the frame. What this did is it darkened the top of the photograph so that we could now get this in one shot. In this case, Carol, you asked me about using the evaluative meter, but if you were using a gradual neutral density filter, you would have to go to spot meter. You would have to move your spot meter down here to the bottom where the wine glass is. And you would dial in your f-stop and dial in your shutter speed based on the non-darkened image, the non-darkened part of the image. And then you would take it. And that's how we could get our sky the same exposure as the foreground, because the sky is usually 2 stops or 3 stops more than the foreground. But we don't need a graduated neutral density filter anymore. And when I was in Iceland a couple of years ago, I was absolutely amazed at the number of young people that were running around with a graduated neutral density filter on the front of their lens. They were never rotating it. They were never moving it up and down. They probably were not spot metering through the clear thing. They were just running around using it. And there were many times when I just was like, why are you doing this? It's not necessary anymore. Now, why it's not necessary anymore is because in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, we have graduated filter. So in this case, what it means is that we can pull the filter down over the top portion of the photograph, and we can darken the top portion of the photograph and then keep the foreground perfectly exposed. So I don't use these anymore. I don't think we need to use them anymore. I haven't really found a need to use them within the last 10 years, and I think that mine have been sold. So if you think about buying them, or you think that you're going to, or somebody says you need to, you might reconsider that, because I just don't think we need them anymore. So sunsets, when we're traveling or when we're going someplace, you were talking about going to the Tetons, for instance, then what we need to do to get our sunsets or our sunrises in the landscape situation is we need to think about our vantage points. So this is Florence, Italy. And before I went to Florence, many years ago, I went on Google Image and I Googled Florence sunset photographs. And I looked at everybody else's photographs of the sunset from Florence, Italy. And then by looking at their photographs, I could figure out where the Arno was, and I could figure out where the main plaza was. And if you simply look on a map, you can figure out that Michelangelo's Plaza is where everybody goes to watch the sunset. So if you are going to travel to a location and you want to know, well, where's the sunset location or where's the best sunrise location? Good thing is we got Mr. Google who can tell us that now, because most photographers have already figured out in a location where the best sunrise or where the best sunset location is. So I was going to Cusco and I wanted to know the same thing. And I didn't happen to find any sunrise or sunset photographs from Cusco that I was wanting to get. But I was able to get the map of Cusco, and I'm a good paper map person. I like paper maps. I used the paper map and I said, well, okay, sunset always goes down in the west. Sun rises in the east, it goes down in the west. If it doesn't do that, we are in a heap of trouble. So if the sun always goes down in the west, then all it takes is a map and a compass to figure out what the compass direction is going to be for the sun. And I'll show you a little bit more exact method in just a moment. And then I used Google Image to go around the main square in Cusco and figure out where could I be that's facing west so that I can get the two cathedrals in the photograph. Turns out there's a whole side of the square that faces west. And if I used Google Image in a little bit more detail, I could find that there was a pizza parlor on the second floor of a building that had glass sliding doors and a balcony facing west. So this told me that I needed to get my group up in that pizza parlor, stake out a table on the balcony facing west, order our pizzas and our beer. And then when the sun went down, we had our perfect sunset location in downtown Cusco. Unfortunately, we had clouds that night. So we didn't get the photograph we were looking for that I had carefully planned out. But I have now done this in almost every city that I've traveled to around the world to find my sunrise or my sunset location. So where can I go? How high can I get? Where is there a balcony where I can perch? And so it doesn't take much to figure out where your sunrise or your sunset location is going to be when you are traveling. So this is Naples, Italy, facing west from Naples at sunset. Then we face Mount Vesuvius. So this would be our obvious sunrise location, but also it could be a sunset location. So in my compass direction city map method, I found that there was a vantage point way up on one of the hills that happened to have a large parking lot, which means that we could set up our tripods right across the street from a church, which means it was a fairly safe location and an easy location to get taxi cabs to if we needed to get up there, which it turns out we did. And so this turned out to be a great sunset location, going all the way from the streaky car lights at twilight, moving all the way through into more nighttime photography. So figuring out where you need to be for your sunrise or sunset location is simply a matter of finding out where we need to go in the east direction or the west direction and where we can stand. So this is one of my favorite starting locations for figuring out where my sunrise and sunset is going to be. So this is for June 2022 in the Houston area. And this is what you get if you go www.timeanddate.com. You can set any location in the world. You can set any date you want, including a past date if you need to. And then how you read the chart, this is for today, as you see. And the sunrise the sun came over the horizon at 6:20 a.m. this morning. And if you hover over this little arrow, this is not live, it's a screen capture. It tells me that the sun came up at 63 degrees east northeast. And tonight, the sun is going to go down at 8:20 p.m. and it will go down, hover over the little arrow, and it shows, oh, it shows me right here too. Hover over the little arrow if we were really online, and it would tell you that the sun is going to go down west, northwest, 297 degrees. So if you take your handy cell phone and you go into your handy extras, you've got a compass in your cell phone. And if you hold that cell phone flat, face it north, then you will be able to figure out where 297 degrees west, northwest is going to be. So for me right now, 297 degrees west, northwest is going to be right over there. For me, where my compass direction is right now, or where my location is. And it even tells you right on your screen, right there, it's backwards on the screen, of course, but it even tells you where that is going to be. So trying to figure out where your sunrise or your sunset location is going to be is as simple as going on timeanddate.com, figuring out what the time of your sunset is going to be and what the time of your sunrise is going to be, and then figuring out your simple compass direction. You can use a map, or if you want to go outside in your backyard and you've got a clear view from your backyard, or you want to go to a neighboring shopping center where you've got a clear view from your shopping center. Carol, you're up here with me. So if you wanted to go someplace like the Whole Foods shopping center, for instance, down at Groman's Mill, then up on the top of the garage is a great sunset location. It's a great sunrise location as well. So I've already scouted that one out. So you can get up on top of the garage and you've got a clear view of the horizon, and it's a wonderful sunset location. So you can figure these things out really, really simply for whether you're a traveling destination or whether it's your basic home-based destination, wherever your sun is going to come up or wherever your sun is going to set. We'll come back to this one eventually, because I want to show you that when we start talking about twilight, it also tells you all about your twilights so that we know when we get the blue hour, or as it's called, the blue hour. So you can use a simple compass, your simple cell phone, and all of us have a compass with us now where we used to not have a compass. You can simply figure out where it is. Questions on that before I leave it?
It's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Simple. And you got a compass on there somewhere.
Yeah, I found it.
Good, good. Now we can also use the cell phone apps, and photo pills and photographers ephemeris are the ones that most people end up using. These are apps, and you can put them on your phone, and then you can always go forward in time. If you want to go back in time, you can, but you can always go forward in time. You can change your latitude and longitude based on where you're going to be, and you can figure out where you need to be for your sunrise or your sunset. So you can use photo pills or photographers ephemeris, and I'll show you these in more details in just a moment. Okay. And then my last bit of wisdom on sunrises and sunsets is keep your eyes open. So I was photographing in Spain one evening, ran back up to my room just to go to the bathroom real fast before we went out. And out of my bathroom window, the sun was setting in front of the bell tower next door. So I had to stand on top of the toilet, put my camera out of the very, very tiny window, but keep your eyes open, because we can get beautiful sunrise and sunset locations anywhere that we might happen to be. So keep your eyes open on that sunrise or sunset. Okay. Any questions so far?
No.
Good. Okay. So twilight, going over onto page 2 of your handout. Twilight is a really interesting thing. And it's amazing to me how many people don't know about twilight and what twilight involves. Photographers call it the blue hour. And it is when our camera exposure is balanced between man-made lights and natural skylight. So the natural light of the sky and the natural and the man-made lights are equally in balance at twilight. And this is when we can get some absolute phenomenal photographs. So before the sun goes down, we need to make sure that we understand camera needs to be on a tripod, or our aperture priority using it. Camera needs to be on a tripod. I find that for me, aperture priority is the easiest way to go when I'm doing my twilight photos. Not until we get to solid dark do we need to go to the manual mode, but aperture priority works really, really well. Tripod, and my tripod of choice is the MePhoto Globetrotter Classic Carbon Fiber Tripod. It's a simple, easy to use tripod. Do you have one, Carol?
I actually just bought that one
Did you? Good.
based
Okay.
on your recommendations from the other
Okay,
class.
super,
Yeah.
super, very good. It's well constructed. It's small, it's lightweight, but it's definitely sturdy.
Mhm,
Optional
definitely.
things, we can use a flash. And then also optional, we're going to need this eventually anyway, is an intervalometer or programmable shutter release. And my recommendation for the programmable shutter release is the Velo Shutter Boss 2 wired
Now,
variety.
Do you need that if you can, there's also an app on your cell phone from Canon that you can remote.
It's not going to work for what we need it to do.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I figured there must be an issue with it if this it keeps coming up and everything I'm seeing, this remote cable.
Exactly. And
Okay.
it's simply because, we get to the point with this thing, we're going to need it for a lot of different things. Like it's going to take pictures while we're in our hotel room asleep, for instance. So we're going to use it for a lot of different things. But everything that I've found from the intervalometer inside the camera, it has its limitations. The intervalometer in your cell phone connecting with your camera, it has its limitations. Where if we just put this wired thing into the camera, it costs $50 and it works every single time. And so that's why I recommend don't get the wireless. Wireless doesn't work all the time. I've seen too many people screw up pictures with the wireless. The wired variety just works. That's all there is to it. Yeah. And by the way, just for everybody in the class, I've also got a YouTube video on my YouTube that tells you how to set it up. So it's just an over my shoulder view of me setting it up. But I'll tell you how to do that in class. Okay, so twilight. We have got 3 stages of twilight. And the first one is called civilian twilight. The middle one is called nautical twilight. And the last one is called astronomical twilight. So civil twilight is where we can see without the aid of a flashlight. Nautical twilight is where we can still see the horizon and the beginning of stars. Astronomical twilight is when we have to use a flashlight. So we can see stars. The horizon now has become more obscured. So civil twilight for us in this latitude around the Houston area is 35 minutes after the sun goes down. So from the time that the sun actually goes down, for the next 35 minutes, we are in civil twilight. So we can see perfectly well if we're walking around. We don't need a flashlight, but we can't see any stars in the sky yet. So the sun is going down below the horizon. And then about 35 minutes after the sun officially goes down in the Houston area, then for the next 35 minutes, we get what's called nautical twilight. The sun is 12 degrees below the horizon. You'll never need to remember that again. It's just a trivial matter. But we can still see the horizon and we're starting to see stars in the sky. This is the magic blue hour that photographers talk about. It is when the sun has been gone below the horizon for at least 35 minutes. We're starting to see stars in the sky. We can still see the horizon. And this is when man-made lights and the astronomical light all balance for the next 35 minutes in the Houston area. And then once we're past that next 35 minutes, we get to astronomical twilight. So this is 60 to 90 minutes, an hour to an hour and a half after the sun officially goes down below the horizon. And this is now when we take a photograph, we're going to begin to get a black sky. This is when we're going to begin to get man-made lights overexposing. So this is when we begin to get the disparity between the sky light and man-made lights. So astronomical twilight is when we want to kind of start winding down our photography, because we don't want to continue going, trying to get the blue hour. Now, I say this varies based on latitude, because the 35 minutes, 35 minutes, and 35 minutes are all based on the Houston latitude. So where photographers call this the blue hour, nautical twilight, it might last an hour up in New York, but it doesn't last an hour here in the Houston area. If you go closer to the equator, it only lasts about 15 or 20 minutes. So when I'm in Costa Rica, nautical twilight, the blue hour, only lasts about 10 or 15 minutes. And civil twilight, 10 or 15 minutes, nautical twilight, 10 or 15 minutes, astronomical twilight, 10 or 15 minutes. An hour after the sun goes down in Costa Rica, it's dark. If we go to a northern latitude, then it might turn out that civil twilight lasts an hour, nautical twilight lasts another hour, and astronomical twilight lasts another hour.
Like Scotland. That would
Like
be,
Scotland, exactly. And if it's during the summer in Scotland, Ireland, something like that, then we have nautical twilight all night long. So we never ever get to total darkness. We
Really?
never get to astronomical twilight. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it all varies based on where you are on the earth. And that's
Okay.
why that time and date set for wherever you happen to be traveling is a great tool to have.
Okay.
So when that sun goes down below the horizon and we are in civil twilight, we get this blue edge along many horizons if we can see the horizon. And here and where I am in the woodlands, I can't really see the horizon. But if we could see the horizon, this blue edge right here, this blue edge is the beginning of the shadow of the earth. The pink edge right up here is called the belt of Venus. And the pink edge right here is the last of the sunlight coming over the curvature of the earth. So if you can get up on a mountain or if you're flying, you're going to see an absolutely gorgeous belt of Venus, that pink edge along the horizon. And you can, if you're high in a mountain or you're in an airplane, you can actually see the curvature of the earth as well. And this is during civil twilight. But during civil twilight, we can start getting man-made lights that are giving us those starbursts. They're starting to look pretty good. But to get the sky to have any blue in it, we're going to have to do some post-processing with our graduated filter later on in Photoshop or Lightroom. So at civil twilight, we can kind of get lights looking really good, but we can't get the sky quite blue like we're looking for. But once that sun goes down a little bit more, especially if we face in the opposite direction, so where the sun has been down a little bit longer, then we can start getting that blue sky, that twilight sky, and we can start getting that balance between the blue sky and the man-made lights. But as we go into full-fledged twilight, this is when we get that whole balance between the night sky, but what's left of the night sky, or the daylight, the twilight, and man-made lights. And this is the magic time for us to take photographs. So I always like to know where I need to be at this time, where my location is going to be, and make sure that I have scouted this out ahead of time. So once again, using my trusty compass, where is the sun going down? Where has the sun going down? And where am I going to be able to get my man-made lights that balance with the night sky? So doing some preliminary work so that you know when you're in the location. This is only going to last a short period of time unless we happen to be in Scotland in the summertime. This is only going to last for a very short period of time. So you need to be in location, ready to go, and not wasting any time. Cordoba, Spain. So here in Houston, for instance, it's one of my favorite locations at the Preston Street Bridge over Buffalo Bayou. It gives me a nice man-made lights in the Houston area, nice safe place to be, right across from the aquarium in downtown. And it has a lot of nice views looking in the direction we need it to be. So this is when we can get man-made lights blending with the skylight. And so everything's coming out, and we're going to have to bring out some of the shadows using our shadow slider, but otherwise man-made lights in the sky are exactly where we need them to be. Along the Riverwalk here in the Woodlands for you, Carol, simple, easy place to go. This is when we can once again get those man-made lights, the skylight, all balancing together so that we can get photographs that really look magical. Cameras on tripod. So wherever we happen to be, this is where we can start doing our blue hour photographs. But remember, for us, it's only for 35 minutes. So we've got to be in location, ready to go wherever we need to be. This is at the Train Museum in Galveston, the Arno River in Florence, and knowing where I need to be, pre-scouting it so that this is right as the sun is going down and we're getting to where the lights are looking like we want them to get, to where we've got some little bit more light in the sky. We're getting the lights where we need them to be, and then finally settling down to that twilight sky. And now you notice, because it's a longer exposure, because at f/22 trying to get the starburst on the lights, then that means that the water is going to blur in the river. And that's exactly what we want if we're around water, for that water to start blurring on us. So if you're in a crowded location and you want people to disappear at twilight, then we can use that f/22. And then luckily, if people keep moving, they will disappear. If you want to show how crowded it is, then come off of the f/22, go to an f/8 or an f/11, maybe an f/6.3, no starburst on the light, but now we can see all the people that are in St. Mark's Square. Want people to disappear, then just use a longer exposure. And obviously we're down at ISO 100 so that we can get the longest exposure possible. These little 4 tourists right here irritated me to no end because they would never leave.
Move along, people.
Move along, people. Get out of the way, especially with your white tennis shoes.
I didn't think about the ISO. So the ISO, when you're doing those long exposures, needs to be at a low setting too.
It needs to be low. We want it low. We don't need it high. Yeah, so your ISO is low at this point. We don't need it high at all.
Okay, good.
But figure out where your vantage point is, because this is important. You're not going to have the time later on to when it's actually twilight to get where you need to go. If it happens to be a really popular location, you might find out that there's a ton of people there. So if you didn't get there early, if you didn't get set up right in the beginning, guard your spot, then you might have to contend with other photographers being in the location that you wanted, or other people just with a cell phone that, they're not going to get the picture anyway. But anyway, it's how they take pictures. But that's just what we have to deal with these days. So get where you need to be, figure out where your location is going to be. This is in Spain. Figure out where it's going to be. And remember that the same thing happens at sunrise. So if you're a sunrise person, or your opportunities are at sunrise versus at sunset, the exact same thing happens at sunrise. It starts out darker in astronomical twilight, moves to the nautical twilight, and then by the time civilian twilight rolls around, we're not getting our photos anymore. And then the sun actually comes up. So realize that we have to be where we need to be and think about what your photo is going to be. So once again, that beautiful starburst that comes from that 16 to 35 millimeter Canon lens, or the 15 to 35 that we have on our cameras now, that gives us that beautiful starburst. So think about where you need to be, what your composition is going to be, and get yourself where you need to go and where you need to be at any given time. This is down at the Fulshire Mansion State Park in Anderson, Texas. And at Christmas time, they light it up with candles. So it's only a couple of nights they light it up. The lanterns are all have candles in them. And so, that very, very soft light, figuring out where you need to be ahead of time, scout it during the daytime, and make sure that you're ready to go when you need to be there. And this was another serendipity moment. This is in Sevilla, Spain. I scouted on Google Map that if I wanted to get the tower of the cathedral in the photograph, then we were going to need to be in this square behind the cathedral next to the Alcazar. So I figured out where we could be, and also using Google Map, I figured out where were some safe locations so that we wouldn't get hit by delivery trucks and things in the morning. So if you notice, this foreground area right here is all striped off because it's a no parking area. And so this means that we could stand in this area, be out of traffic, and be nice and safe. You all are all women in this class, so I can talk about being safe in the morning, but this is always one of my prime considerations, is staying safe early in the morning or late at night when I'm out photographing. So I found all of this striped off location, so I knew that we could be safe and out of traffic, so we wouldn't have to constantly be moving the tripods. But then we get there, everything's great, we're photographing, and then that entrance also turns out to be where the workmen bring their stuff in early in the morning for the Alcazar, a major tourist destination. So when the workmen opened those big, huge doors to come in and deliver their wares, then it gave us an opportunity to walk in, set up our tripods. We were already set to take the photograph, and then get back out of there. And then it turns out that right after we took this photograph, a man came through with a wheelbarrow full of wet cement, and he spilled it on the cobblestones. So there was this big, huge disaster going on. And luckily we got our photograph before all that happened. And so be aware of locations that you can go where you can get what you need, but then also be aware of what's happening around you. In this case, when they opened the doors, I just knew I could get my people in there really, really fast, take the picture real fast, and get out of there, guys. So just be aware of those serendipity moments. So once we start moving away from nautical twilight into astronomical twilight, we only have a little bit of time before the sky is going to go completely dark. So once again, I cannot emphasize enough. Figure out where you need to be for your nautical twilight. This is Fez, Morocco. Look for things like rooftop bars, rooftop cafes, wherever you need to be that you can get some sort of a vantage point. This happens to be through the window of my hotel room in Charlotte, North Carolina. And total serendipity, but I took the picture by putting the lens right up against the glass, because otherwise all the little red lights from, charging things in the room and that type of stuff were shining. So the camera in this case is right up against the glass. The lens of the camera is touching the glass. So, use it to your advantage, and then figure out where you need to be ahead of time. Take advantage of the situation. This is out in the Sahara Desert when we spent nights out there for night photography. And then realize also that your shutter speeds do matter. So going back to basic photography class, I taught you water blurred at 1/8 of a second. Remember that? So water blurs at 1/8 of a second are slower. So down at the George R. Brown, that water from the fountain, if you want it to blur, then we need to take that shutter speed down to 1/8 of a second or slower to get that water to blur. But if you want the cruise ship to be solid, then you were going to have to use a faster shutter speed. So even though we're working at our twilight and we're thinking about starbursts and F-22 and all this other stuff, if you want that cruise ship to be solid, then you're going to have a shutter speed fast enough to stop that cruise ship. So cameras on the tripod. This might mean raising the ISO to 200 or 400. We don't need to be at F-22, but we need to think about how much of a shutter speed do I need to be able to stop that cruise ship. So think about, it's a combination of all kinds of other things that are going on at the time.
Why wouldn't you shoot at f/22 to try to get that clear? Or do you not?
You could, but if at f/22, which is a really closed down aperture, I may not be able to
Get
get
enough light?
60th of a second without raising my ISO
I
to
see.
800 or 800 or 1600. And I
Okay.
don't really want to go that far. I mean, it's okay in the R cameras, but I may
Yeah.
not want to go that far. So
Okay.
it's that we still got to think about all those different components going on. Still that f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO still play into it.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Good question though. So if we've got something like the moon, and I'm going to talk about the moon in more detail, but if we've got something like the moon, then we don't want the shutter speed to be too long because the moon's going to blur because the Earth is rotating so fast. So remember that the Earth is rotating really, really fast. So you've got to think about all the different components that go into this to make sure that we get things like we want them. The aurora in Iceland. So pinpoint stars, I'll talk about these eventually, so you know how to get these. But if I want to stop the aurora as it dances across the sky, then I've got to have a fast enough shutter speed to stop the aurora. Otherwise, it just becomes a blur across the sky. So we've still got to think about that shutter speed. So if we've got something like the tall masted sailing ship going through the harbor in Venice, I've got to really raise my ISO because the sailing ship is under power. So I've got to have a fast enough shutter speed to stop the sailing ship as it comes through the canal. So you've got, we're turning loose of certain things now, going into the high ISO so that I can stop the sailing ship. You notice that the waves are stopped. So this means I'm using a fairly significant shutter speed. So I'm probably in the 250 range here. So we've got to think about all the different components that we need. Put them all into practice. Twilight, but if I want those Ferris wheels and rides at Kima to be all blurred, then, f/22, yeah. This is a super wide angle lens, by the way. It's a mini fisheye lens.
Okay.
And you notice it's not very good quality because it only has a few spokes in the starburst there.
Galveston.
So at Pleasure Pier in Galveston, exactly. We've got a lot of these new Ferris wheels that have the colors on them. And if you want the color on the Ferris wheel, this is Twilight, you can see, then we have to have a faster shutter speed, because what happens if we have a slow shutter speed is when each one of the colored lights has flicked on and off several times and gone through its little spectrum, all the colors are now overlaid on each other, so they're now white. So if you want the color in the Ferris wheel to come out, then it's a shorter shutter speed, because a longer shutter speed is just going to give us a white Ferris wheel. So you see a shorter shutter speed gives us colors in the Ferris wheel. I think I show a longer shutter speed gives us white in the Ferris wheel.
Okay.
And so you've just got to think about what we're trying to do, all the different components of what we're trying to do. And you notice in each one of those shots of Galveston's Pleasure Pier, from twilight to the end of twilight to astronomical twilight, excuse me, say that again, Kathy, nautical twilight to nautical twilight to astronomical twilight. Now we're just in black sky. So once, to me, I'm in astronomical twilight heading toward full darkness, then that's when it's time for me to quit doing this type of night photography, where we are trying to get man-made lights. And then blurring the water versus crystal clear, or streaking the water. And then also something that you need to keep in mind is the white balance tool later on. Now I'm using auto white balance all the time. I am not changing my white balance for my night photography. There are some other people who will tell you to change your white balance. I don't change my white balance. If I change my white balance, then I'm probably going to forget it some other time. If we use the white balance tool later on in Lightroom or Photoshop, then our picture goes from this to this. So we can use the white balance tool, and all that I did was touch this white light right here in the minaret with my white balance tool later on, and the photo went from this to this. So we can change our white balance later on versus having to change it in the camera. One more thing we might forget when we're thinking about all kinds of other stuff that has to go on. So I leave my white balance where it is at auto. Okay, questions?
Nope.
No? Okay, so everybody that's in the class, I need to talk about the moon, because the full moon is on the 14th of June. So that is the day after our next class. And the night of the 13th, you are going to have to be out ready to photograph the moon. And you'll see why in just a moment. So I want to introduce you to photographing the full moon now so that you've got some time to digest it. And then we'll talk about it more on the morning of the 13th. But then the evening of the 13th, I'm sorry, erase all that stuff and say it again. The evening of the 13th, you need to be outside in location, ready to photograph the full moon. Even though it's the night before full moon, I'll explain why. So I'm going to introduce you to full moon photography now so that you have a chance to digest it, and then we can fine tune it tomorrow, next week, when we meet again on Monday morning next week. So full moon photography. Okay. So on your handout, the full moon, the official full moon, that would be on the 14th of June, comes up an hour after the sun goes down. So sun has gone down. An hour after the sun goes down, the official full moon comes up. But you all know now, twilight's 35 minutes, or civil twilight's 35 minutes. Nautical twilight is 35 minutes. Astronomical twilight is 35 minutes. So astronomical twilight is 60 minutes to 90 minutes after the full moon goes down. Astronomical twilight is when our photography doesn't look that good because the sky's getting so dark. So if we want to photograph the full moon, for us, by the time it gets over the horizon and we can actually see it, the sky is totally black. So this exposure is quite difficult to take because the sky is black and the moon is reflected sunlight. Remember that from elementary school. So the moon is as bright as the sun, but it's in a solid black sky. And so trying to get the balance between the two of them is really hard. So photographing the full moon. First of all, I just told you that the full moon comes up an hour after the sun goes down. So tonight, our sun goes down at 8:20. So that's when our sun goes down at 8:20. Our moon tonight comes up at 9:20. Excuse me, erase that. Our sun goes down at 8:20. So our moon should be visible in the sky if it were full moon night, an hour later, but it's not full moon night until June 14th. So I've got to get you prepared for this. So you would be able to see the moon in the sky at roughly 9:20 p.m. But by that time, the sky is starting to get really dark. So to get a photo like this, we photograph it the night before full moon, because the sun goes down a minute later every day. And the moon comes up an hour later every day. So the night before full moon, So this would be the 13th of June for us right now. The night before full moon, the full moon or the moon is going to come up when the sky is still twilight. And as a result, we're going to be able to photograph the moon with man-made lights in the twilight sky, and everything's going to bounce
So
through
it
the
should,
light meter.
so it should be around 8:20.
Exactly. So the night before full moon, the full moon comes up, or the moon comes up, and the sun goes down on the opposite horizon at the exact same time, or roughly the same time.
Okay.
I can't say full moon because I have
Yeah.
a friend who is absolutely fanatical about full moons. And he keeps saying, but it's not a full moon. And I say, well, yeah, but it looks like a full moon. So
Looks pretty
anybody
close.
else would call it a full moon. So
Mhm.
if we want to photograph something like this, then we have to figure out, once again, using timeanddate.com will tell us what compass direction is the moon going to come up. And also, what compass direction is the moon going to come up? And is the moon going to come up at the same time that the sun is going down in the opposite horizon? This happens to be the end of the Texas City Dike in July. And using my little compass, my handy compass and compass directions, I started looking for all kinds of places where I could get an unobscured view of the horizon at the time that I needed it to be. Where we live here in the Houston area, we have a lot of haze on the horizon. And so chances are you are not going to get in this in this location, the moon cresting over the horizon. We would have to be in a really dry location without a lot of haze on the horizon to get that. And of course, a clear, unobstructed view. But by the time the moon gets up about this high, then we can see it pretty well. So you just have to figure out, once again, where we need to be. But we can photograph the moon anytime during its cycle. It just might be higher up in the sky. And in fact, right now, when we're moving into the different phases of the moon, right now is a good time to go out and practice photographing the moon. We get more definition on the craters because we have more shadows on the craters a couple of nights before full moon or a couple of nights after full moon. The angle is just going to be a whole lot more precarious because we're going at a different angle in the sky than shooting straight across. We're going to be shooting more up in the sky. But working leading up to full moon or leading away from full moon night, which is the 14th of June this time, we're going to get more shadows on the craters. So we're going to get more definition on the craters. So it's something to think about. To photograph the full moon, then what we are going to have to do is, first of all, we need to switch off of evaluative or matrix metering. Matrix is if you're Canon, evaluative is if you're not, evaluative is if you're Canon, matrix is if you're Nikon. We need to switch off of matrix metering or evaluative metering. And the reason for this is that the camera is trying to expose the entire sky as well as the moon. So it's taking a fairly dark sky or a really dark sky if we're trying to do this the night before full moon. It's trying to expose a pretty dark sky and an object illuminated by the sun. And so what we end up doing is we get an overexposed moon. If we switch to spot meter, and spot is called partial in our Canon cameras. If we switch to partial meter and now go off of aperture priority and go into manual mode, you will see a round circle through your viewfinder because your spot meter is right in the center of the frame. This works on your R cameras and it works, Tina, on your 5D Mark IV as well. You'll see a round circle in the middle of the frame. You've never seen that round circle before unless you're on spot meter. Cameras on tripod, put that round circle precisely on the moon. And now dial in your f-stop and dial in your shutter speed. And remember, you're on the manual mode. Then you can recompose and focus on the moon. So you can use your touch screen on the back to focus on the moon if you want to. You can focus on the moon without your autofocus on your lens. So you can turn off your autofocus on your lens completely. Cameras on a tripod, focus on the moon, but focus on the edge of the moon, not the front of the moon, focus on the edge of the moon. And then you can move your moon where you want it to be. So this is using that method, and you see the difference between, you know, post-processing. This is evaluative. This is how we can post-process it. And this is what we get if we use the spot meter. So you can put that spot meter right exactly on the moon, that round circle that you get through your viewfinder, put it exactly on the moon, cameras on the tripod, dial in your f-stop, dial in your shutter speed, and then focus on the edge of the moon. And you're going to get a perfectly exposed full moon coming up the night before full moon. Okay. And you got to figure out where you're going to be and what your compass direction is going to be. Questions? No? Okay. So you can do that.
I played around a little bit with this when we had that lunar eclipse. I did some Googling to try to figure out some of my settings, and that was key, focusing on the border there of the moon.
Focusing on the edge of the moon, exactly.
Yeah, on the edge, yeah.
Exactly. And that's also on my blog, how to photograph the lunar eclipse, from times that we've done that in the past. And all the moon photography, by the way, for you all, and all the night photography is on my blog as well, if you want that. So spot metering does not follow focus point in all cameras, and it doesn't anymore in Nikons. By the way, when we had 10D, 20D, 30D, 40D Nikons, our spot meter always followed focus point. So wherever our spot meter was, that was where our focus point was. It does not follow focus point anymore. I wish they would have given us back that feature, but it does not follow focus point anymore. So you're going to balance your light meter in the M mode, and then you can move your camera to compose. If you want to stay in aperture priority or shutter priority, then you can use your exposure lock button and then recompose. And make sure also that you're taking frequent meter readings. So going back to your moon, lining it all up, dialing in your f-stop and shutter speed. The R cameras, the R5 and the R6, what's really, really nice with these cameras is that I can see if the moon is overexposed. So sometimes I might even go one stop underexposed right in the camera because I can see it right through the viewfinder. And so I'm really, really liking moon photography with the R5 and the R6. It's working really, really well. So once again, planning your shot and making sure that we're where we need to be and that we're in location where we need to be so that we can make sure that we are going to get our photograph with our moon coming up. So figuring out where you're going to be, using a map of Sevilla, Spain. On the night of the full moon coming up, I figured out that I could stand on a bridge with my group, looking at Google Map from the aerial view. The bridge had a lot of pullouts in it for pedestrians with benches, famous sunset watching location in Sevilla, Spain, probably. And so that's where I knew we could go. So I could get the group there. I could stand in some place that was relatively safe. So you've got to plan your shot ahead of time and then take advantage of serendipity like the boats coming through. So plan your shot ahead of time. So here's what it looks like if we charted out sunrise and sunset. So 6:03 sunset, and these are not the times coming up. These are just some times that I chose at random when I was making the class. So here at sun goes down at 6:03, But the moon that same day comes up at 5:08 p.m. So notice that the moon has come up while the sky's still blue. The next day, sun goes down, 6:04 p.m. Moon comes up at 6:11, which means while that sun is going down, this moon right here at 6:11 is coming up, cresting the horizon, getting above the horizon, and it's now going to be up in my twilight sky. So this 6:11 is when I'm definitely going to be out there photographing the moon. Next day, sun comes up at 6:05, or sun goes down at 6:05, but notice this, the moon now comes up at 7:14. So 6:05, an hour and 15 minutes later. So this full moon is coming up in a progressively black sky. And in our area, by the time the moon actually gets above the haze on the horizon so that we can see it, that's a black sky. So for us, this location, Houston area, this moon coming up at 7:14 p.m., that means that sky is going to be nearly black. Reverse it with sunrise. Sunrise is coming up at 7:08, but the moon set 5:58. So the moon set a long time before the sun came up. Next day, sun comes up at 7:07. Look at this. The moon sets at 6:39 in the opposite direction. So this moon at 6:39 is going to be in a twilight sky. And then the next day, sun rises at 7:06. The moon sets at 7:18. So this might be an equally nice time to photograph right here, because we've got the sun going down on one horizon and moon coming up in the other horizon. So if you just look at those charts, it's a simple way to figure out where you need to be and what time you need to be out there and what's going to happen. So this is what PhotoPills looks like. Do you have this on your cell phone, or have you tried it? So this is what PhotoPills looks like. So PhotoPills, you know, I set my date, and then here's where the full moon's going to be. The full moon's going to rise at 7:31 p.m. right here.
Mhm.
Full moon. Oh, it's right here. Look at this. So it's the full moon is going to be right here, but the moonrise is going to be right down here, 7:31 p.m. moonrise right here. And then it also tells you that the sun is going to be at a -2 degrees, which is below the horizon. And so this would be part of the golden hour. And then right here, you're getting some other things. So here's sunset right here. Here's officially sunset. That's how to read that. And then this official full moon up here, this is where I was telling you that I've got a friend who's real picky about when it's the real full moon. It's not really full moon until 12:13. Okay. So it's not an official full moon. This is my friend who's very, very picky about that. So this just kind of gives you an idea of what it looks like on your cell phone if you were using PhotoPills.
Okay.
And then this is what it looks like if you're also using PhotoPills for the planner. Now, I had to do a photo one time for Texas Highways of full moon coming up over a marsh. So I had to go into this and figure out, of course, the night before full moon, I had to figure out where I could be safely standing in a marsh so that when the moon came up, I was getting the marsh in the foreground. And I did that through using PhotoPills. So I went ahead and I planned it ahead of time, moving my dates forward. And then knowing this location at Bolivar Flats where it's safe, my car is safe, I can park, and where I can walk out to the marsh. So I figured this would be a fairly safe location, fairly good location to go. Now, where did I have to stand to be in the marsh, get the marsh water, and get the sun, get the moon coming up at the same time? And I was able to do it knowing that I needed to be there on Saturday, February 8th, 2020. So you can see when I planned this. And then I needed to be there at 6:03 p.m. So I needed to be there ahead of time so that I could park my car, put on my wading boots, walk out to the marsh, get where I needed to be, and then my moon would come up. I did this also during the winter, by the way, because I figured there would be less haze on the horizon than there is during the summertime. And then that was closer to my due date too. So you can use this PhotoPills as an equal planning location. And then you can actually look at the maps and figure out where you need to be. So I find it an easy program to use.
Okay.
And then here's the shot that I ended up getting.
Nice.
Yeah. This, by the way, is the introduction to using which lens we use, because the wider the lens we use, the smaller the moon will be. I'm sure you found this when you were doing the
Yeah.
eclipse, didn't you?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So the wider our lens is, the smaller our moon is going to be.
Mhm.
So to get a somewhat big moon, then I needed to use a 24 to 105 millimeter lens on the R cameras or the 5D Mark IV. So that field of view at 105 millimeters, when I zoomed, would allow me to get my foreground of the marsh and would allow me to also get my moon big enough, because the wider your lens is, the smaller your moon is going to be. And I've given those to you a little bit on your handout. So this was done the exact same moon. So going back to this one, this is the moon with the 24 to 105 millimeter lens at 105 millimeters. And then this is the lens with the 100 to 500 millimeter lens with a 1.4x extender. So this is 700 millimeters on the same night.
Wow.
And even though it's not officially full moon night, looks like a full moon to me. So, yeah. So using your evaluative or your matrix light meter on full moon night with the foreground in the shot, like we did over the marsh, because I've got the full moon in the shot and I've got the foreground in the shot, full moon is going to overexpose on us, even though it's the night before full moon and we're getting more of a balance. Man-made lights are going to be okay, like you can see on the foreground of this shot, but the moon in this shot is going to overexpose. So this is where Tina, using your 5D Mark IV, you want to take the shot and then see if you need to underexpose a little bit. Carol and Stephanie, you all have the R cameras, so you're going to be able to immediately see that the moon doesn't have an exposure in it. You're not going to see any detail in the moon on the back of the camera when you're taking the picture. So go ahead and underexpose if you're using a wide angle lens to get the full moon in your picture. You're probably going to have to overexpose by about 1 stop. So it's too hard to spot meter this small of a moon. So we would still use our evaluative or our matrix if we were Nikon users, but we're going to want to underexpose and check the back of your camera on your mirrorless, or double check once you've already taken your photo on the back of the camera. So we still want those details of the moon, but this is using that 105 millimeters, so you can see how big the moon is going to be in your photographs. This is a 300 millimeter. So once again, you can see how big your moon is going to be in your photographs. So even at 300 millimeters, we can see the moon, we can see the detail in the moon, we know it's the moon, but it's not very big, but it is big enough in a photograph that we can see that it's a full moon. So this is 300 millimeters. And then if we don't have a lot of millimeters and the moon gets a little bit higher up in the sky, go ahead and let it blur a bit. Don't worry so much about freezing the moon if it's behind some clouds. Go ahead and let it blur just a little bit. And if you let it blur just a little bit, it looks a little bit bigger. And then we can also get its shadow, its reflection coming in the water. So if the moon is obscured by clouds, we're not going to see detail in the moon anyway. So don't get so frantic about trying to use the right shutter speed to freeze the moon. Just, work on everything else. And then there are times when we're going to get that moon just peeking over the horizon. And unfortunately, this was a handheld shot because I wasn't expecting it. So you see it's not real clear, so don't look at it real close. But that full moon, literally on full moon night, coming over the horizon in a dark sky. Now, remember, this is an hour to an hour and a half after the sun's officially gone down. And this is when we can see stars in the sky. So you can see now we've got stars in the sky plus the full moon coming over the horizon. But trying to get everything balanced it becomes a bit more precarious at this point. Once that full moon gets up in the sky, the literal full moon, then this is when we just go ahead and let it overexpose, because once it gets up in the sky, we're not going to be able to capture that detail in the moon without doing a double exposure. So, one of the moon and then one of the detail. And remember that there's various locations around the world where people go to watch the sunset or to watch the sunrise, most of the time sunset. And this is in El Paso, Texas. And I remember this from when I was a child, when I grew up in El Paso. So we used to go up on Skyline Drive and watch the sunset. And it was near that granddad's house. So we could watch the sunset from his back patio. And this is where the adults would sit and have a drink in the evening, or we would barbecue or whatever. So when I went back to El Paso to do some work for a story, I remembered that, okay, there was a lookout, and lo and behold, there is a lookout. And while I was photographing, that's Juarez going off into the horizon. When I was at this location doing the shot, this couple arrived and to see the sunset like everybody has done for years. And he held his cell phone in his hand and it lit up their faces. And so I asked them if they would mind lighting that cell phone up one more time, standing real still. So I composed my picture around that. So their faces are being illuminated by the cell phone. So take advantage of that serendipity when it comes. And then we can use that moon to our advantage, that full moon, because that full moon can illuminate the foreground as well in our shots later on of the stars. And we'll talk about star trails in later exercises, classes, but we can use that full moon to illuminate the foreground in front of us for the remainder of our night photography and use it to our advantage. This is a full moon over my shoulder, illuminating the grasslands in Tanzania while I'm getting a star trail. So we can use that full moon to illuminate things later on. So the full moon is bright. Remember, it's reflected sunlight. And that's why we've got moon shadows on the night before full moon, of full moon, and the night after full moon. So we have actual shadows that are cast by the brightness of that moon. We can take advantage of that and use it to our advantage in photography. And then during the rest of the month, remember, there's a moon in the sky. So when there's a moon in the sky, we can do things with it. We can play with it. We can put it in various places. Remember to use it to your advantage and place it where we need it to be. Okay, questions for me, Stephanie? Nope.
Nothing. Nope.
Okay. Okay, so let me tell you what your homework assignments are going to be. And you've got your homework assignments on your separate handout where your homework assignments are going to be. So your assignment for this next week is I want you to photograph the sunrise or the sunset. So wherever you are, photograph the sunrise or the sunset. Assignment number 2, I want you to photograph a recognizable silhouette against the sunrise or the sunset. So you're going to work on a silhouette, recognizable against the sunrise or the sunset. And then I want you to photograph a scene with man-made lights at twilight. And this might be a bridge at twilight, a shopping district at twilight, cityscape at twilight. Avoid really bright lights like a stadium or a shopping center because they're not going to be able to come out properly. So you're going to go out, figure out when twilight is, what's your safe 35 minutes that you've got, be out there ready to go, and photograph man-made lights at that twilight time. So assignment number 1, photograph the sunrise or sunset. Assignment number 2, a recognizable silhouette. And assignment number 3, man-made lights at twilight. And then according to on your homework assignment, page 2, I have given you how you're going to send those photos to me. So you're going to process them and save them in JPEG format. Try to keep it real. If you had to over process to cover a mistake, then don't worry about it, but try to keep it as real as possible. No moving a moon from an old photograph, by the way, but that's coming next time. And then you're going to resize your photographs to 1280 pixels on the longest side by 96 DPI. You're going to name the photograph with your name in the beginning of it. And then hopefully by noon day before, so Sunday, the 12th of June by noon, if you would upload your photos, I will send you a link to my Dropbox. If you want to use your Dropbox, you're more than welcome to, or if you want to use your WeTransfer or whatever you have, feel free to do that. And then I'll take your photos and I'll put them into a PowerPoint presentation, and we will talk about them next class. And one of the beautiful things about this masterclass series is you get to show your homework, and you get to talk about how hard it was and what heartaches you had and how you beat your head against a wall and all the other things, or how easy it was. So if it turns out this is a problem for you, like if, for instance, it gets clouded over for the next week, then you get to talk about that and what a hassle it was to do your homework assignment and to resize your photographs. Oh, and lesson 3 or homework assignment for week after next, the 19th, due the 19th of June. I'm going to go ahead and give it to you now because you can start wrapping your head around what you're going to have to do for your moon photographs. And this is where you're going to use one of your lenses to photograph the moon with a foreground. So this means you've got to figure out where the moon is going to be. Determine the moonrise time of the with the compass direction. And then number 2, you're going to use a different lens with the moon. And then number 3, you're going to use your longest lens with the moon. So you're going to photograph with your wide angle lens, a different lens, and then your longest lens with the moon. But this, once again, you won't do this assignment until the week of June 12th, going to the 19th. But if you want to start thinking about where you need to be, then you can at least start wrapping your head around this. Do you know how to resize your photos?
I think I can figure it out. I haven't done it recently.
Okay, so this is the screen that you will get either in Bridge Adobe Camera Raw or in Lightroom.
Okay.
And you will right click in Lightroom and do an export. Are you Lightroom or Bridge Adobe Camera Raw?
Lightroom.
Lightroom. So in Lightroom, you'll highlight your picture and then you'll do an export, and then you will export, and then you'll get a screen that looks just like this.
Okay.
And you will select the folder where you want the resized image to go. If you want to change any names, this is where you would pull down this little screen, this little line right here to put your name before your photograph. You would change it to JPEG right here. I don't need a high quality JPEG, so you can change this to 8. And then down here under image size, you would click this one and you would do either height and width if you want to, or long side. I would do long side, and then change the width to 1280 or the long side. And then your resolution down here would be 96.
And all that's on the handout.
All that's right here.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And then your handout, your size is on your handout. Yes, it is.
Okay.
And then if you were just in plain old ordinary Photoshop, you would pull up your picture in plain old ordinary Photoshop. You would go to image size, and then you would change your size right here to 1280 on the longest side, 96 resolution right here. And this is what it looks like enlarged. Starts out at 300, and then you would resize it to 1280, 96. This is just in plain old ordinary Photoshop. And then say okay, and then reset, and then save it. Okay. And then I will present everybody's work next class, and you'll get a chance to talk about them, share information. Questions?
Nope, looks good.
No, you're good? Okay,
Yeah.
so you can go back to taking care of your granddaughter,
Yes, back to grandma duty.
back to being grandma. And then I will quit recording this right now.